Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's March 25th, 2025. We're kicking off part one of today's Deep Dive, and, well, you know the drill. It's current affairs, but tailor-made for all you UPSC aspirants out there.
We've got a pretty diverse mix of topics lined up, and yeah, some might ring a bell from our previous discussions. It's always good to revisit key concepts, keeps those neurons firing right.
Exactly. Think of it as an extra layer of revision built right in. And if you're finding these deep dives helpful on your UPSC journey, don't forget to show some love, hit that like button, and subscribe to stay in the loop.
All right, let's get down to business. Looks like we're starting off in the realm of environmental regulations.
Yep, we're heading straight to the Sukhna Wildlife Sanctuary. The Punjab government's just submitted its stance to the Supreme Court on the eco-sensitive zone, the ESZ, surrounding the sanctuary.
Ah, the ESZ. Always a hot topic. So what's the Punjab government saying?
Well, they're proposing a 100-meter ESZ for the Nanagan Municipal Committee. But here's the thing. Earlier discussions were suggesting a much wider zone, like 1 to 3 kilometers.
Okay, that's a pretty big difference. We're talking about a potentially much smaller buffer zone now. I wonder what's driving that change.
Now, to understand this, we need some background on the sanctuary itself. It's not just some random patch of forest. It's nestled right next to the iconic Sukhna Lake in Chandigarh. We're talking about the Shivalik foothills here.
Right, the Shivaliks. So geographically, it's already a sensitive area. And if I recall correctly, Sukhna Lake itself is an artificial creation, isn't it?
You got it. Back in 1958, the legendary architect Le Corbusier, the guy who pretty much planned Chandigarh, he decided to divert the Sukhna Cho, a seasonal stream, to create this lake.
Makes sense. And then to tackle the inevitable soil erosion around the new lake, they started planting trees, which eventually led to the Sukhna Wildlife Sanctuary being officially designated in 1998.
2,600 hectares of protected land, right?
Precisely. So you see, the area's history itself hints at its ecological vulnerability. The soil is sandy with clay pockets, which makes it super prone to erosion. And beyond Sukhna Lake, there are actually about 150 other smaller water bodies within the sanctuary. Wow, that's more than I expected. And what about the flora and fauna? I imagine it's quite diverse given the mix of habitats.
Oh, absolutely. You've got a mix of forests, grasslands, and wetlands. Some key trees you'll find there are kher, fulai, kikar, and shisham. For grasses, moonj is pretty common.
And in terms of wildlife, what can we expect to see?
Well, keep an eye out for squirrels. Those are always around. You might spot a common mongoose, and peacocks are pretty frequent visitors, too. And, of course, you can't miss the hillmeons. Their calls are so distinct.
Ah, the hill myna. Love those guys. Don't forget the migratory birds, too. They play a huge role in maintaining that ecological balance.
Now, connecting this back to our UPSC aspirants, when you come across environmental questions related to protected areas, remember this. Location matters. Understanding the unique geography, like the Shivalik foothills in this case, is crucial.
Couldn't agree more. And of course, the composition of the ecosystem, the types of habitats, the resident species, the migratory visitors, that's all vital information.
All right, let's shift gears now and head northeast. We've got news from Meghalaya where the Interline Permit System, the ILP, seems to be creating some roadblocks, literally.
Ah, the ILP. Always a fascinating topic. It's a classic example of how regional regulations can sometimes clash with national development plans.
The latest is that Indian Railways might have to put some of their projects in Meghalaya on hold because of local opposition, and guess what's at the heart of it?
The ILP, I'm guessing.
Bingo! Now, just to refresh everyone's memory, the ILP is essentially a special travel document.
Yeah, it's required for non-residents to enter certain, shall we say, protected areas within some of the northeastern states. And remember, this applies even to Indian citizens who aren't permanent residents of those states.
Right. And this system has deep historical roots, going all the way back to the Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation of 1873.
Wow, 1873, that's going way back. So what was the original purpose of this regulation?
Well, it was mainly about safeguarding the indigenous tribal communities living in those areas, protecting their land, their culture, their very way of life from outside influences.
Makes sense. Even back then, they recognized the need to preserve those unique cultures.
Absolutely. And fast forward to today, we've got 4 states where the ILP is still in effect. Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Mizoram, and Manipur. Manipur joined the list relatively recently in 2019.
Now, To fully grasp the legal complexities, we should probably touch upon a couple of other regulations as well. You've got the Foreigners Protected Areas Order of 1958, which designates certain areas near international borders where even foreign nationals need a special permit, the Protected Area Permit, or PAP.
Right, and then you've got the Foreigners Restricted Areas Order of 1963, covering places like the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and parts of Sikkim where entry is restricted.
So to be crystal clear, the ILP is for Indian citizens entering those Pacific Northeastern states, while the PAP is for foreigners wanting to visit certain sensitive border zones or restricted areas.
Exactly. And who issues these permits? Well, the ILP comes from the respective state governments, while the Ministry of Home Affairs handles the PAP.
And while both aim to control entry, the ILP's core focus is on protecting the unique sociocultural fabric of the indigenous communities in those northeastern states.
Now let's zoom in on Meghalaya. They've got very limited rail connectivity right now, with only the Mendipethar station operational since 2014.
And the Northeast Frontier Railways had plans to change that, right? Weren't there 3 new lines in the pipeline?
There were the Tatalia-Bernahat, the Bernahat-Shillong, and the Chandranath-Purjaway lines. Ambitious projects, all aimed at boosting connectivity in the region. But now they're facing strong local resistance.
I see. And I'm guessing this resistance is tied to the ILP and the concerns about a potential influx of outsiders.
That's the crux of it. People are worried about the impact on local demographics, resources, and the very cultural identity that the ILP is meant to safeguard. It's a delicate balance trying to reconcile national development goals with the protection of regional interests.
No easy answers there. And for our UPSC folks, this situation is a prime example of the challenges and nuances of federalism in India. Think about the special provisions granted to certain states, the distribution of power between the center and the states.
Speaking of significant milestones, let's switch gears to a landmark that's turning 50 this year, the Farakka Barrage.
Ah, the Farakka Barrage. A true engineering marvel and a constant presence in geography textbooks.
You know it. It was commissioned way back in 1975, strategically placed on the Ganga River, Murshidabad district of West Bengal.
And that's pretty close to the Bangladesh border, right? I seem to recall it being just 18 kilometers upstream.
Right, you are. It took them a solid 12 years to build this thing, a whopping 130 crores back then. Finally started operations on April 21st, 1975.
I can only imagine the scale of that project. So remind me, what was the main purpose of the Farakka Barrage?
The primary objective: divert a massive chunk of the Ganga's water. We're talking 40,000 cusecs.
40,000 cusecs. Just to be sure everyone's on the same page, a cusec is a unit of flow rate, cubic feet per second. It means a huge volume of water is being diverted every second.
Right, and all this diverted water is channeled into the Farakka feeder canal. Why? To flush out the silt that was clogging up the Bhagirathi-Hooghly River, the goal was to make sure ships could easily navigate to the Kolkata port, which was having serious siltation issues.
Ah, that makes sense. Keeping Kolkata port operational, that's vital for trade and the economy. But diverting that much water, especially on a river like the Ganga, so close to the border with Bangladesh, I'm sure that created some diplomatic challenges.
You bet it did. Water sharing agreements are a constant point of discussion between India and Bangladesh. The 1977 Farakka Agreement was specifically aimed at addressing this, and later the 1996 Ganga Water Treaty laid out a more comprehensive framework for cooperation.
Complex stuff for sure. Now let's break down the Hooghly River a bit. It's also known as the Bhagirathi-Hooghly, and sometimes even Kati-Ganga. It's essentially a 260-kilometer distributary of the Ganges.
And if you look at a map, you'll see the Ganges splits right around Murshidabad. One branch, the Padma, flows into Bangladesh, and the other becomes the Hooghly, winding its way through West Bengal.
Right, and the section of the Hooghly above Kolkata was the one facing severe siltation problems, which is where that Farakka feeder canal comes in. Especially during the dry season, that extra water flow is crucial.
And it's not just the Ganga contributing to the Hooghly's flow. You've got other rivers feeding into it too, like the Haldi, the Ajay, the Damodar, and the Rupnarayan. And geographically, it passes through several important cities: Jiganj, Azimganj, Murshidabad, Baharampur, and of course the Grand Dame herself, Kolkata, with Howrah right across the river.
Connected by those iconic bridges, the Howrah Bridge and the Bali Bridge, it's quite a fascinating waterway.
Projects like the Farakka Barrage are a perfect example of the intricate links between infrastructure development, geographical realities, and international relations. When you're studying India's water resources or its diplomatic ties with its neighbors, these mega projects offer valuable insights.
Absolutely. Now, how about we switch gears to something a bit more dazzling? Let's talk about lapis lazuli. Ever heard of it?
Lapis lazuli. It's been called the Earth's best blue for a reason, right?
It really is a mesmerizing color. Imagine a deep, vivid blue metamorphic rock, often used in jewelry and ornaments, and even as a pigment. We're talking about a semi-precious gemstone with a history that goes back thousands of years.
And the name itself is quite interesting. Lapis is simply Latin for stone, and lazuli comes from the Persian word lazward, meaning blue.
So it's basically blue stone, right? Pretty straightforward, but what gives it that intense blue color?
The main player is a mineral called lazurite. It usually makes up about 25% to 40% of the rock. And fun fact, the exact shade of blue can vary depending on how much sulfur is present within the lazurite structure.
Oh, that's cool. Like a chemical fingerprint affecting the color. And what about those golden speckles you often see in lapis lazuli?
Ah, those are from pyrite, another mineral often found embedded within it. And sometimes you'll see calcite too, which can actually make the blue appear a bit less intense. There might also be smaller amounts of diopside and sodalite mixed in.
So it's a real mix of minerals, each contributing to its unique appearance. And where in the world do we find this beautiful blue stone?
Well, there are a few major sources: Afghanistan, Chile, Russia, and the United States. But historically, the most prized lapis lazuli came from the Badakhshan province in Afghanistan. They've been mining it there for over 6,000 years.
6,000 years. That's incredible. So where does India fit into this story?
Well, lapis lazuli was a hot commodity even back in ancient India. We know it was being imported from Badakhshan as far back as in 1000 BCE.
That long ago. There must be some archaeological evidence to back that up.
Oh, there is. They've found lapis lazuli ornaments at Indus Valley civilization sites. Clearly, this stone had a special place in their culture.
It seems to have been a global favorite. The ancient Egyptians were big fans too, using it for jewelry, amulets, and even as a pigment for that iconic blue eyeshadow.
And during the European Renaissance, lapis lazuli was ground down to create ultramarine, one of the most expensive and sought-after blue pigments used by the great masters.
A true blue,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
So how does lapis lazuli connect to the modern world?
Well, there's this thing called the Lapis Lazuli Corridor, which was inaugurated back in 2018. It's an international transit route connecting Afghanistan to Turkey, passing through Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and Georgia along the way.
A modern-day Silk Road, you could say.
In a sense, yes, it's designed to boost trade and economic integration between South Asia and Europe. And the name itself is a nod to that ancient trade route where lapis lazuli, along with other precious goods, was transported for centuries.
It's amazing how a single material can have such a long-lasting impact, shaping not only art and culture, but also trade and geopolitics. For our UPSC aspirants, think about other examples of resources that have played similar roles throughout history.
Switching gears again, let's talk about international trade, specifically something called anti-dumping duty. It's been in the news lately because India just slapped these duties on 5 Chinese products.
Anti-dumping duty. That's a key concept to understand if you want to grasp the intricacies of global commerce and trade policy. It's basically a way for a country to protect its domestic industries from unfair competition.
So imagine a scenario where a company is exporting goods at a price significantly lower than what they sell for in their home market. That practice is called dumping.
And to counteract this, the importing country can impose an anti-dumping duty on those goods, effectively raising their price and making them less competitive.
Right, and the duty is usually calculated based on the difference between the normal value of those goods in the exporting country and the ridiculously low price they're being bumped at.
The goal is to level the playing field and protect local businesses from being undercut by these artificially cheap imports. Now, it's important to note that the World Trade Organization, the WTO, does allow for anti-dumping measures under certain conditions. They see it as a tool to ensure fair trade.
But like any policy, it has its pros and cons. On the one hand, it protects domestic industries, but on the other, it can lead to higher prices for consumers in the importing country.
Exactly. And in the long term, it might actually discourage domestic companies from innovating and becoming more competitive because they're shielded from the pressure of those cheaper imports.
Now, in India, the authority in charge of investigating dumping cases and recommending anti-dumping duties is the Directorate General of Trade Remedies, or DGTR. They're part of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry.
And at the helm of the DGTR, you've got the designated authority. They lead the investigations and make recommendations, but the final call on imposing the duty rests with the Ministry of Finance.
Now, while we're on the topic of trade remedies, let's briefly touch upon something called countervailing duty, or CVD.
CVD. This one kicks in when a foreign government is giving subsidies to its exporters. Those subsidies make their products artificially cheaper in the global market. So the importing country can impose a CVD to offset that unfair advantage.
Right. Both anti-dumping duties and CVDs are WTO-compliant measures, but they target different types of unfair pricing. Anti-dumping tackles dumping itself, while CVD is all about counteracting the impact of those pesky foreign subsidies.
And the amount of each duty is determined differently. Anti-dumping duty is calculated based on the margin of dumping, how much lower the export price is compared to the normal value. For CVD, it's all about the value of the subsidy being provided.
So there you have it, folks. A crash course on anti-dumping and countervailing duties. Crucial concepts for anyone trying to decipher India's economic policies and its place in the global trade arena.
Now let's turn our attention to a region that's been making headlines lately. The Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz. It might seem like a small, insignificant waterway on a map, but in geopolitical terms, it's a powder keg.
Absolutely. Recent reports suggest that Iran has been beefing up its military presence there, installing missile systems on those disputed islands near the strait. And with the U.S. always keeping a watchful eye on the region, tensions are running high.
So for those who might not be familiar with the geography, the Strait of Hormuz is essentially a narrow passage separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula.
More specifically, it's sandwiched between Iran to the north and the United Arab Emirates, and a little sliver of Oman called Musandam to the south.
It's the only maritime gateway connecting the oil-rich Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and, from there, to the rest of the world's oceans.
And despite its narrowness, we're talking about 167 kilometers long, with a width that varies between 39 and 95 kilometers. It's deep enough to handle those massive oil tankers. Some key islands in the strait to remember are Hangam, Hormuz, and Qishm.
Now, here's why it matters. A huge chunk of the world's energy supply flows through this narrow strait. We're talking about roughly 30% of the global liquefied natural gas trade and a whopping 25% of all the oil transported by sea.
So you can imagine what happens when things get tense in the Strait of Hormuz. Even a minor disruption can send shockwaves through global energy markets, causing oil prices to spike.
And for a country like India, heavily reliant on energy imports, stability in the Strait of Hormuz is absolutely crucial. It directly impacts our energy security and has ripple effects throughout the economy.
It's a constant reminder of how geography and geopolitics are intertwined, and how events in a seemingly distant waterway can have a direct impact on our lives. Keep an eye on this region, folks. It's a geopolitical hotspot that's always worth watching.
Speaking of global flows, let's shift our focus to a topic that's directly relevant to India's economy: remittances. The Reserve Bank of India just released its latest report on the subject, the sixth round of India's remittances survey, covering the 2023-24 financial year.
Remittances, that's the money that Indians working abroad send back home. And the latest survey paints a rather interesting picture. It seems the source of those remittances is shifting.
Right. The big takeaway. The US, the UK, Singapore, Canada, and Australia, those 5 countries now account for more than half of all the remittances flowing into India.
That's a noticeable shift away from the traditional reliance on remittances from the Gulf countries. Seems like the Indian diaspora is diversifying, finding opportunities in new corners of the world.
And the overall trend is upward. India's total remittances have more than doubled in the past decade or so, going from $55.6 billion in the 2010-11 fiscal year to a massive $118.7 billion in 2023-24.
Impressive growth indeed. So who's the top contributor now?
The United States, no surprises there, they accounted for a hefty 27.7% of the total remittances in 2023-24.
And what about the UAE? They've traditionally been a major source, right?
They are holding steady as the second largest contributor, but their share hasn't increased all that much, going from 18% in 2020-21 to 19.2% in 2023-24.
So it's the US and UK showing the most significant growth. In fact, during the last fiscal year, the money sent back from those two countries combined was close to 40% of the total coming through banking channels. That's more than the combined contribution from all the GCC countries, which stood at 38%.
And if you look at how those remittances are distributed within India, Maharashtra takes the top spot. They received 20.5% of the total in 2023-24, overtaking Kerala. Tamil Nadu is in third place with 10.4%, followed by Telangana at 8.1% and Karnataka at 7.7%.
Fascinating. Tracking these trends tells us a lot about the global mobility of Indian workers and how India's economy is linked to the rest of the world. This rise in remittances from advanced economies like the US and UK suggests a shift in migration patterns and perhaps higher earning potential for Indians working in those countries.
Now, for our next topic, let's venture into the world of finance. Specifically, we're going to unpack the concept of derivatives, especially in light of recent news involving IndusInd Bank.
Derivatives. They can be quite the head-scratcher for those who aren't immersed in the world of finance. But they're important to understand because, as we've seen with IndusInd Bank, they can have a huge impact.
Tell me about it. The bank reported massive derivative losses, a whopping 2,100 crores, just on March 10th, 2025. And the impact. Their share price plummeted by 23%.
That's a stark reminder of the risks involved. So let's break it down. What exactly are derivatives?
In the simplest terms, a derivative is basically a financial contract whose value is based on, or derived from, an underlying asset, an index, or an interest rate.
Think of it like a bet on the future performance of something else. For example, you could have a derivative contract that's based on the price of gold, oil, or even the stock market.
Right. Companies use them to hedge against potential risks, while investors use them to speculate on future market movements. You can also use them to diversify your portfolio, spreading your bets across different asset classes.
And the range of underlying assets is vast. We're talking stocks, bonds, commodities like gold, oil, agricultural products, currencies, interest rates, and broad market indices like the Nifty or Sensex.
The source material mentions something called exchange-traded currency derivatives, or ETCDs. What are those all about?
ETCDs are basically standardized contracts that let you speculate on future currency exchange rates. So if you think the rupee is going to weaken against the dollar, you could buy an ETCD that profits if that happens. And unlike over-the-counter or OTC derivatives, which are private agreements between two parties, ETCDs are traded on organized stock exchanges, just like stocks.
So that means more transparency and regulatory oversight for ETCDs, right?
Exactly. Now, while ETCDs focus on currencies, there are other types of derivatives like futures, options, swaps, and forwards.
Give us a quick rundown of each, if you were.
Sure thing. Futures are contracts to buy or sell a specific asset at a predetermined price on a specific date in the future. And imagine a farmer who wants to lock in a price for his wheat harvest 6 months from now. He could sell a wheat futures contract to do that.
Got it. What about options?
Options are a bit different. They give the buyer the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell the underlying asset at a certain price before a certain date. Think of it like an insurance policy. You pay a premium for the right to buy or sell, but you don't have to exercise that right if you don't want to.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. What about swaps?
Swaps involve exchanging cash flows based on different financial instruments. Imagine two companies, one paying a fixed interest rate on its debt and the other paying a floating rate. They could enter into an interest rate swap where they agree to exchange those payments. This helps them manage their interest rate risk.
And lastly, forwards.
Forwards are similar to futures, in that they're agreements to buy or sell an asset at a future date. But they're usually privately negotiated agreements tailored to the specific needs of the two parties involved. For example, an importer might use a forward contract to lock in an exchange rate for a future payment, protecting themselves from currency fluctuations.
So we've got futures, options, swaps, and forwards, all different flavors of derivatives, each with its own quirks and complexities.
And it's the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, that's tasked with regulating the derivatives market in India. They work to ensure transparency, prevent market manipulation, and protect investors from undue risks.
The IndusInd Bank case is a clear reminder that derivatives, while potentially useful tools, can also be quite risky if not managed carefully. A solid understanding of these instruments is becoming more and more important in today's financial landscape.
No doubt about it. Now for our penultimate topic, let's return to environmental concerns. This time we're focusing on the growing issue of the urban heat island effect.
Right. The Telangana Socioeconomic Outlook report for 2025 has highlighted this issue, pointing to increased nighttime heat stress in Hyderabad as a direct consequence of this effect.
It's a growing concern, especially in rapidly urbanizing countries like India. Essentially, the urban heat island, or UHI effect, refers to cities being significantly hotter than their surrounding rural areas.
Not just a degree or two warmer, mind you. We're talking about significant temperature differences, sometimes as much as 12 degrees Celsius hotter in cities, especially at night.
And this isn't just about discomfort. These higher temperatures can impact energy consumption, strain power grids, worsen air pollution, and pose serious health risks, especially for vulnerable populations.
So what causes these urban heat islands?
Several factors contribute. One major culprit is the way we build our cities. Replacing natural vegetation and soil with concrete and asphalt is like turning our urban landscapes into giant heat sinks. These materials absorb and store a lot more solar radiation than natural surfaces, leading to higher surface and air temperatures.
And with fewer trees and green spaces, there's less evapotranspiration. That's the process where plants release water vapor, which helps to cool the air.
Right. Less greenery means less natural cooling. The physical layout of cities also plays a role. The dense clusters of buildings and narrow streets trap heat, creating what are often called urban canyons. It's like creating little ovens within the city.
And we can't forget about the heat generated by all those cars, air conditioners, and industrial processes. They all add to the problem.
The term urban heat island itself comes from temperature maps where cities literally appear as islands of higher temperatures surrounded by cooler rural areas. And here's a key point. Urban areas tend to hold on to that absorbed heat and release it slowly during the night. That's why the temperature differences between cities and their surroundings are often most pronounced at night.
This highlights the urgent need for sustainable urban planning and development strategies that take the UHI effect into account. We need more green spaces, more reflective surfaces, and better building designs to mitigate this growing problem.
Couldn't agree more. Now for our final topic, let's talk about a global health challenge that continues to demand our attention. Tuberculosis, or TB.
March 24th is World Tuberculosis Day, and the theme for 2025 is Yes, We Can End TB. Commit, invest, and deliver. A message of hope and a call to action.
And here in India, the president himself has commended the National TB Elimination Program, or NTP, for its work in reducing the number of TB cases over the past decade. India has set an ambitious goal: eliminate TB by 2025, which is even more ambitious than the World Health Organization's target of 2030.
A bold goal indeed, but what exactly is TB?
TB is an infectious disease caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It mainly affects the lungs, which is known as pulmonary TB, and that's the type that spreads most easily. But TB can also attack other parts of the body.
And how does it spread?
It spreads through the air. When someone with active TB in their lungs coughs, sneezes, talks, or even sings, they release tiny droplets containing the bacteria. If someone else breathes in those droplets, they can get infected.
So what are the warning signs?
Keep an eye out for a persistent cough that lasts more than 3 weeks, especially if it brings up phlegm or even blood. Unexplained weight loss, drenching night sweats, a fever that just won't go away, and constant fatigue are also red flags. Some people experience loss of appetite, chest pain, and swollen lymph nodes.
Now, it's important to distinguish between latent TB infection and active TB disease.
Absolutely. With latent TB, the bacteria are in your body, but they're dormant, like sleeping soldiers. You don't feel sick, and you can't spread the infection. But with active TB, the bacteria are multiplying and attacking your body. You have symptoms, and you can spread it to others.
The good news is that TB is treatable.
Right. The standard treatment involves taking a combination of antibiotics for 6 to 18 months, depending on the type of TB.
Right.
There's also a vaccine, the BCG vaccine, which mainly protects babies and young children from the most severe forms of TB.
And how's India doing in its fight against TB?
We've made significant progress. The incidence rate has come down from 237 cases per 100,000 people in 2015 to below 200 per 100,000 in 2022, a 16% decline. The mortality rate has also decreased by 18% since 2015.
That's encouraging. Are there any regional variations in terms of progress?
Definitely. States like Himachal Pradesh, Odisha, and Gujarat are leading the charge, showing great results. However, states like Punjab, Bihar, and Karnataka need to step up their game. They're lagging behind in meeting the national targets.
So there's still a lot of work to be done. TB remains a major public health challenge, and India's commitment to eliminating it by 2025 is a testament to the dedication of our healthcare workers and policymakers. Understanding the disease, how it spreads, the symptoms, and the available treatments is crucial for everyone.
Well said. And with that, we wrap up this first part of our deep dive for today. We've covered a lot of ground, from environmental protection to geopolitics, from global trade to financial instruments, and from urban challenges to public health.
As you prepare for the UPSC, remember that these seemingly disparate topics are all interconnected. Think about the bigger picture, the underlying trends, and the connections between seemingly unrelated events. That's the key to developing a holistic understanding of current affairs.
And on that note, we leave you with a thought to ponder. How do environmental regulations impact economic development? How does regional autonomy influence national integration? And how do global economic and geopolitical forces shape local policies and individual lives? These are the questions worth exploring as you delve deeper into the world of current affairs.
This has been the Deep Dive for March 25th, 2025, Part 1. Keep those brains buzzing, keep learning, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives to help you ace those UPSC exams.